Welcome to my newest raid guide for the 12th circle of Anabaseios. This time, we're fighting Athena. Before we begin, I recommend you set up your modified clock spots that are a little different than the previous fight, whereas we have the melees and tanks up front, and the healers and ranged in back. We also want to make sure we have our pairs in the same format with tanks and melees up front, ranged and heals in back. This will make some future mechanics easier, so just pick these spots for now and go with it. Like all the other bosses, she'll first start with a raid wide, called On the Soul. For the next mechanic, Paradeigma, I suggest using a strat that involves burning your tank's invulnerabilities, but makes the mechanic far easier. After using Paradeigma, 2 adds will spawn on the north or south side of the arena, and bait AoEs on the nearest players. Next, they will shift sides of the arena. If they initially were on the west, they'll end up on the east, and vice versa, and repeat the same mechanic. To make this easier, we have both tanks go on whichever side the adds are on, and then the party goes on the opposite. At the same time, Athena will start using Trinity of Souls. Alright, so with Trinity of Souls, we have some ground rules. Each wing will glow and do a half rim cleave. Every time, she will pick a total of 3 wings. Next, she will either start with a bottom wing or start with a top wing. If she starts with a top wing, the AoEs will go off as indicated. If she starts with a bottom wing, the middle wing will do the opposite. For example, if she starts with a bottom wing, shooting left, right, left, the right side will be safe the entire time because the middle wing is not actually shooting right. If Athena starts with a top wing and does left, right, left, you will have to zigzag between each pattern. So to bring everything back together, we have our tanks invulning on the side with the adds. Meanwhile, the party and tanks are sliding between the safe spots of Trinity of Souls. Once that's resolved, Athena will use another Paradeigma cast, this time summoning adds across the arena. Each player will either be marked with a debuff, which means they will summon a tower, or they will have a tether attached to them. To resolve this mechanic, every tether will stretch out exactly opposite of where it spawned from. Once this is done, the remaining players will have 2 light towers as well as 2 dark towers. The dark players will want to stand adjacent to the players with yellow tethers. Conversely, the players with light towers will stand adjacent to the players with purple tethers. Regarding the tower placements, each tower will have 1 DPS and 1 support. To put this to our advantage, we have a priority system akin to P8s with the snake mechanic if you're familiar. DPS will start on the northwest corner with their priority and scan counterclockwise, finding their first possible location to stand. The supports will start at northeast and navigate clockwise until they find the appropriate spot to stand. The goal is to have 1 tower player and 1 tether player in each quadrant of the arena. Once the lasers and towers resolve, 4 visible towers will now spawn that will be soaked by the tether players who were standing adjacent to them. You'll want to scoot into these towers and let them resolve. At the same time, on the north platform, you will see adds visible shooting lasers down the arena. They will either be positioned that the first and third platforms get shot, or the second and fourth platform get shot. These adds will always spawn true north, so while you're resolving this, you'll want to keep your eyes over there. Once everyone survives that, Athena will use another On the Soul raid wide that you want to mitigate pretty heavily. The first proper tank buster of the fight will then come out, called Glaukopis. This is a hard-hitting line AoE buster that you'll want to do a tank swap for. There isn't too many tank busters in this fight, so tanks will want to make sure they mitigate this very heavily. Okay, so next is Superchain Theory 1, as well as another Engravement of Souls, which just puts debuffs on you. Before we jump into this though, we have to define all of these debuffs and what they'll be doing. For clarity, I'm going to be calling things light or dark, so that way we're not reading all of the specific names of each debuff while describing this. You're going to have 2 light players and 2 dark players. You will have a dark and light laser and a dark and light tower. The final debuff is a little unique. The dark and light stacks will turn into spread markers at the end of the mechanic. Before worrying about spreading though, they'll have to participate in the 4-man laser stacks, and only do the spreading at the very end of the mechanic, after the in and out. Now that the debuffs are defined, we're going to come back to those a little later. We're going to deal with the superchain portion of the mechanic first. On a random intercardinal on the arena, an orb will spawn. 2 different orbs will be tethered to it. The first we're going to worry about will either be an in or out mechanic that will happen simultaneously as a clock spread or a pair mechanic. The 4 variations are as follows: out in pairs, in pairs, out and spread, in and spread. After we get hit by this first pair or protein mechanic, this is the time where our debuffs will now be in play. We will be either moving to the left or right as a party. The way you know which direction you're going is that one of the orbs on your left or right will have a donut-shaped AoE, implying that you must stand inside of the orb. That's where the party's going. So, to resolve this, everyone's going to check their debuffs. We had both of our light tilts on the left, the light tower on the left, and conversely, the dark tilts and dark tower on the right. If you have the laser, you'll need to switch groups. So the 1 dark laser goes with the 3 lights, and the 1 light laser goes with the 3 darks. Everyone will then be blasted by the lasers, and their debuffs will change. To be honest, you can ignore this change in debuffs, as what you had initially determines everything you're doing in this mechanic. Once the light party lasers have resolved, there will be 1 final orb to deal with. It will either be an in followed by out mechanic, or out followed by in. It's imperative that if you have a tower to place during this mechanic, that you pre-position as best as you can towards your marker that you plan on dropping it on. And finally, once they've baited the towers on the cardinals, the players that had the lasers will soak the towers that spawn. As this happens, the 4 players that had tilts will have spread AoEs. I'm making sure to include footage of every single roll so you can get an idea of how this resolves. This is the hardest mechanic in the fight by far, so don't be afraid to replay this section and watch it be done a couple times. To break it down and make it easier, if you have a tilt mechanic, you will not be interacting with the towers at all. You will just be in your assigned light party based on your light or dark, and then spread at the end. If you have a tower, you will remain in your side during the light parties, and then spawn the tower on the cardinal. And if you have a laser, you will be stacked with the opposite party during this light party mechanic, and then soak the tower at the end. Once Superchain is completely resolved and everyone soaked their towers, another Trinity of Souls will happen. This time, she can potentially start from the top wing, whereas at the beginning of the fight, she will always start with the bottom. Once Trinity is complete, 1 of 2 attacks will come forward. Apodialgos or Peridialgos. The only difference between the 2 is who baits what. There will be a 6-man party stack, as well as a soaked tank buster. If it is Peridialgos, the furthest player will bait the stack, meaning party out, tanks in. whereas Apodialgos is when the party is in baiting the stack and the tanks are out baiting the buster. This will be followed up by another raid wide on the soul. After healing up that raid wide, a third Paradeigma, as well as Engravement of Souls, is up next. This time, supports will be getting debuffs, whereas DPS will be getting tethers. Okay, let's talk about supports first. Supports are going to get either a plus, an X, or a tower. Healers can sit on east and west and wait for their assignment. No matter which role you get, you're going to have a tower to soak at the start of the mechanic. In the event you get the plus sign AoE, you'll go north, soak your tower, and then after the tower, you're going to stand in the top left or top right part of the platform, depending on which platform is safe, and wait for the plus sign AoE to come out. Once that's done, you'll bait the ad that's on your platform. If you get the X AoE, you'll go south and soak the tower that spawns there. And after your tower, you're going to stand in the bottom, whichever corner, left or right, but you're going to be on the bottom but middle part of that platform and bait the X AoE. Once the X AoE is done, you'll bait the ad. If the support is a tower, they will be on either east or west and soak their first tower. And then once they're done, they're going to place their tower. If the light tower and light tethers are on you, you will place your tower in the middle. If the light tower and dark tethers are on you, you're placing on the edge of the hitbox. Before I go too deep into what each player is doing, let me first describe what is actually happening in this mechanic. So all the DPS are going to have tethers, which they will stretch and soak, while the two DPS players on their platforms are dropping towers for them to soak. Two of the DPS players are going to end up soaking said towers, and two of the DPS players are going to end up baiting line AoEs. So essentially all that's happening is people are either baiting AoEs away or they're soaking towers. First, we have to get into what everyone's doing. Okay, so for DPS, all four of them are going to get a tether. Two are dark, two are light. At the start of the mechanic snapshot, you're going to see two towers spawn in your party list. It'll either be two lights or two darks. It'll never be a mix. If it's two dark towers first, then the two light tether DPS will be soaking them. And if it's two light towers, the two dark tethers will be soaking them. Meaning, every pull, two of the DPS will be soaking towers, and the other two DPS who are not soaking towers are responsible for baiting the AoEs that spawn from the ads. The hardest part of this mechanic is actually the very specific spacing the DPS have to do with aiming their tethers. We've provided some diagrams to help you position yourselves. But once the actual lasers go out, all you have to do is keep track of who needs to soak and who needs to bait. And after that, there will be another On the Soul raid wide that will restore all of the platforms back to the arena. With the platforms now restored, the tanks will need to get ready for the second tank buster of the fight, called Glaukopis. Is the same one from before. Make sure no one's standing in the line AoE. And then the boss will mostly stand still for this part and do some untelegraphed attacks. First, some ads are going to spawn around her in an untelegraphed fashion, and eventually there will be a screen break, and about 3 or 4 seconds afterward you'll take a massive raid wide. So once you see the ads start to spawn around her, you can pop your mitigations. The next mechanic happens while the boss is untargetable. You'll see a visual cue where she says, "Behold such power as you will never wield," meaning that every player is now going to get a number 1 through 8 above their head. We're going to provide a diagram for this, but there is set start positions that each pair should go into. One by one, she's going to dash to each player, doing a circular AoE around them, which must be soaked with a buddy. It is worth noting that this dash has extreme proximity damage. meaning if you are even one step too close to her when she does the dash, you're gonna get one-shotted. So you should be tucked up against the wall as close as possible and as close as you're comfortable with, or else you will fail the proximity damage and take something north of 100,000 damage, making the mechanic not solvable. Let's break it all down. The add will serve as our new relative north. The 1s and 3s will stack on the opposite of that add, in the new relative south. 2 and 4 will start where the add currently is, except off to the side to make sure they don't get hit by the initial dash. 5 and 7 will be on west. 6 and 8 will be on east. Another very important note is that other than the dashes that are happening in numerical order, there will be 2 baited line AoEs happening from the center for a total of 4 times. 5 and 7 should be the first 2 people to bait this line AoE, followed by 6 and 8. By the time they've soaked their line AoEs, 1 and 3 and 2 and 4 have already gotten hit by their baits. Once you get hit by your circular bait, you should walk directly out of it and wait to get hit by the second one, because you're in a pair. Once you've soaked your 2 blasts, you want to quickly swap positions with the players that just took the line AoEs and take your own line AoEs. I want to put a heavy stress that you want to be on the wall for this mechanic when taking your pair soaks. The damage on this can be quite punishing, so even though it's a downtime mechanic, healers, as well as people with mitigations, should be doing everything they can to make sure everyone survives. As a DPS, make sure to use Second Wind or any other healing capabilities you have between your first and second hits. Once all 8 numbers are resolved and all 8 line AoEs are complete, everyone will then run to true north-south, because she will delete the entire platform, save for that section. Once Athena returns, she will use Theos' Ultima. Your party should use every single targeted mitigation you have available. Feint, Addle, and Reprisal should be a given, and if you have a Machinist, put Dismantle on this. You'll be hit by a massive raid wide, that then leads us into the next mechanic. Once you're healed up from Theos' Ultima, we'll be moving into Superchain 2A, the second to last mechanic of the fight. So for Superchain A, I like to break it down into 3 distinct positions. First will be your start position, the second will be middle, always, and the third is your end position. The first mechanic will always be a pair mechanic. The second mechanic will always be an in mechanic in the center of the arena. And the third mechanic will either be a protean or a pair. So what you're going to want to do is at the very start of the mechanic, you need to first determine whether you're beginning on A or C. After that, you'll want to quickly check if you are ending on A or C. It will often work out that you will start and end on the same cardinal. Sometimes, though, you'll have to cross through to the other cardinal after doing the dynamo in middle. Finally, you'll want to pay attention to the wings as this is happening. The trick this time is that during the protean or pair mechanic, there will be a Trinity of Souls cast going off. It's worth noting that this time with Trinity of Souls, she will always start from the bottom wing. Another tidbit of information I wanted to add in relation to the wings is that there are 3 different patterns of the wings. You're either staying on the same side, moving after 1 blast, or moving after 2 blasts. For reference, if you're moving after 1 blast, you will always cross over immediately after the first pair mechanic goes off. If you're moving after 2 blasts, you move immediately after the middle dynamo resolves. Those times will work every single time, guaranteed. Once Superchain 2A is resolved, Athena will follow up with another Apodialgos or Peridialgos. And immediately following that, you will have another On the Soul raid wide. This is probably the toughest mit and heal check in the fight right here, so any major resources you have, feel free to burn them. After the final On the Soul raid-wide, Athena will then use the final mechanic of the fight. This time around being Superchain Theory 2B. To start things off, there will be a series of orbs, pair mechanics, protein mechanics, and line AoEs from ads, just like every other mechanic you've already done. Let's break it all down. First, there will be an in mechanic, or a dynamo, on north or south. You will see the blue ring-shaped AoE, signifying which safe spot to stand in. After that, the next safe spot will be on either Delta or Bravo, because Athena will begin casting Parthenos, which is a north to south cleave that you cannot be standing in. To determine whether you're going west or east is due to one of the orbs having a pair or protein mechanic attached to it. Once you've dodged to the respective side, you'll want to resolve the pair and protein mechanic that's waiting for you there, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you check true north, as the two ads will be positioned on the first and third, or second and fourth rows, like before. So, once you do your pairs, followed by the ads, lasers, dodge, the final mechanic will be an out protein on either your left or right at this point. And after that final protein mechanic, 3 of the 4 platforms that you are currently standing on will be destroyed, leaving only one safe platform during her soft enrage. Her soft enrage is composed of 2 On the Soul raid wides, followed by an untelegraphed hard enrage. I want to thank each and every one of you guys for watching this video. I hope it has been useful, and we will have the part 2 guide out as quickly as we can as well. Any criticism is welcome in the comments, and also I'll answer any questions people might have about any of the mechanics or strategies that we used. Thank you all again, and I'll see you on the next one. Later.